Okay, I'm toggled on, Genevieve says. So, hey, can everyone hear me? Elf, my machine Earth, cyber shaman. Yeah, okay. McKenna Academy says we're live. Crystal Jewel, Pete, Sean Fitzgerald, thank you for coming from our Patreon group. Elf Machine Earth, Jess. Oh my, there's a lot of you here. Kevin Whitesides, the archivist for Terence McKenna, if you should know. A lot of great materials. Christina, wow, look at all you wonderful humans. Crystal Jewel, all clear, this is good. Paul Vigil, my great magician friend from Las Vegas. Let's see, Aaron Tain from up in the San Juan Islands. Topanga is here. We've got Stephen Hammerling, must be from Europe. John DeWald. It's gonna acknowledge everybody for a bit here. Edgar Pira, Caboose. Greetings from Milwaukee, from Eddie. Robin Billings, from Billings, Montana? No, she's from Michigan. Let's see, Mihai, maybe from Romania. It's all in Oslo. My God, look at all of you. Now it's going past Quebec, Denver, Scotland. I'm a Bruce, you know. Leamington Spa, what a lovely town. It's SF. Brooklyn, Karen in Brooklyn, Quebec, Honolulu, Deutschland, Portland, Schenectady. Now there's a mouthful. South Africa, yes. Golden Gate Park, oh my goodness. Barcelona, Split, Croatia. It's a beautiful place. Montreal, Multiversity. That's a great institution. Wow. Georgia, Richmond, Virginia, Kansas, Amsterdam, London, Lisbon, Slurpee. Jordan, my goodness. East Palo Alto, Mexico, Ciudad de Mexico. Jackson, Wyoming, Slovenska, Praha, Czechoslovenska, or Czechia now, right? Goodness gracious, Santa Rosa. What you drinking? Well, I'm drinking the world's first draft latte in a can. How's that for a plug? Okay, the chat is open according to McKenna Academy. So what would you all like to hear about? What kind of tales? More moments between me and Terence. How about that? Is that? The wit of Terence. Oh my goodness. Knew no bounds. My favorite experience with Terence was at the very last moment with him, because we had this encounter, and to some degree I felt as though some kind of a mission that he had undertaken was not in full but partially passing my way. And you don't have to accept these missions. And I wondered about that. I was a nerdy person. I was not a psychedelic person. Can you believe that when I met Terence, I had experienced about as much as a hash brownie. I was a very naturally trippy person, and in fact, I have a name for that, and it's called endotripping, and it's a whole new thing. This endotripping, and endo means endogenous. So endogenous means made from within. Exogenous is when you take something into the system. So there's exotripping when you take something, and there's endotripping when you just start to get a downloaded vision. Has anyone had these kind of intense downloaded visions, either lucid dreaming or just awake awareness? Have you had endo tripping? Well, when I was 9, I decided that my mind was like a TV set, and if I could only turn off my awareness of the normal worry stuff, worrying about what my brother did or things I didn't do that day, and come to calmness, the static of the mind would quiet down, and then the channel would open, and you could dial it, and you could get all these visuals. So I used to do this as a kid. I used to dial my consciousness down, or my worry kind of cycling mind down, and then these pictures would appear. Initially, it was fractal washes, and I noticed this red and black washes. Like tonight, when I close my eyes to go to sleep, I'll see these pulsing, incredible fluorescences, just one after the other. And decades later, I worked out that is endo-DMT. I did an A-B comparison with ayahuasca and determined that these patterns were endogenously made DMT. Now, Dennis talks about that DMT is a natural thing. It's the dream or the spirit molecule in Richard Straussman's language. Endo-DMT, and you can dial it up, and we do it all the time. If we're reading a really great novel, or we're in a really great dream state, I think we're pulsing endogenous DMT. So throughout my teen years, this got so developed highly because I was bored at school. Was anybody bored at school? Right? So there's a few strategies when you're bored at school. And for me, I would go into deep imagination, like Star Wars worlds, or I would draw incredibly detailed landscapes on sheets of paper. And I lived in these endo worlds for my entire teen years. And I drew them. I drew thousands of drawings of these worlds that I was inside. So that became my profession. So in my 20s, I took up code. I got addicted to writing code. I wrote a whole little operating system for PCs that presented windows and icons and stuff for the first time, working with a little company called Elixir, which worked with Xerox. So I built one of the first systems that had pull-down menus, and you could drag things, and you could put documents up, and that was before Windows. So I created that whole thing from scratch. And having this endo ability allowed me to visualize a giant piece of code as a machine and fly through it and find bugs. I could visualize all the moving parts. So I could write a complete graphical interface myself. And then that became virtual worlds. That's how I met Terence. I could make these worlds, and I could lead teams of people to make vast 3D virtual landscapes that we would hold events, the avatars events in there. And that's how Terence and I met, were these invisible landscapes made visible through code. It's just tremendous. And then that became my profession in designing spacecraft and missions with NASA. And then it became the biochemical origins of life, just becoming the protocells, becoming those peptides, becoming the energy. And I could go into these worlds and become the system I was trying to solve or discover its secrets. And so I stayed away from any kind of drugs. And in fact, an aspirin would blow me to the cosmos. I couldn't touch them. So I stayed away. And then I met Terence in 97 and realized, wow, our worlds are converging. Terence's world of the trip space, not of the imagination, these magical worlds that he travels in and writes trip reports, and my worlds, which were endo worlds, were not as powerfully magnified, but they were similar. And believe it or not, I never had a conversation with Terence about endo tripping. Never did. He would have, for him, he would say that you couldn't get there on the natch, which meant you couldn't get there just sitting there. You had to take something exogenously. But I was doing it, and I stayed away from introducing anything into my system because I didn't want to mess up the endo tripping. So for the first few years of experimentation, I was very careful of putting a firewall up between my endo tripping machinery in my mind and what the medicine was doing. I kept them separate. And then slowly, through disciplined practice, I allowed them to merge into one thing, running at the same time. And then everything became much more powerful. I call this practice winding the vine. And what I mean by that is if you take a powerful medicine, it's going to dominate your system and take you where it takes you. But if you take a thread of medicine, a thread of endogenous presence, a thread of energy, a thread of music, a thread of pure awareness, turning off consciousness, presence in, say, the rainforest, and you wind these energetic systems all together, you create a cord, a cable away that's far more powerful for your own healing and your own visioning than just being slammed with a single system. So winding the vine. And that's the methodology that I've used to this day to tackle the origin of life and now how everything is made. Terence used to ask another question when we were talking, which was, what is going on? You remember him saying, what is going on? And with this winding the vine and presence, I'm asking this thing called the field to reveal what is going on. And that's where I am now. And in a sense, so what I gave you there is a little bit of a triptych of where I've taken that thread forward of that last encounter with Terence. And I'll tell you the last words with Terence, because this is a Terence event. So we were about to leave the hotel in Kona. We were about to depart, and Terence was saying his goodbyes, and we were saying our goodbyes to Terence. And what we did was Constance Demby played her fantastic space bass and her synths in this room, in this hotel. And then we were invited to lie down on the floor. So we lay down on the floor, and Terence sat right in the middle. And we were invited, like, we could take a nap, we could send him healing energy, we could space out, whatever. It's just up to us, and Terence was just going to be there. And as soon as my head hit the carpet, I was transported into an intense endo trip. the endo trip that linked Terence and myself, I believe, at that moment. So I was crossed over into a green plane, almost like an early virtual world, with an azure sky and just nothing, just in infinitude, except there was a person there, and it was Terence. And I was the pure observer sphere, just like how you do endo tripping, just a pure detached observer. And there was Terence, and he was sitting kind of like folded up like this. And then I heard a sound, and it was a whirring sound, like whir, 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 whir. And I looked up, and there was this point, this sort of pointillism thing coming down into the scene. And it got bigger and bigger. And it resolved into an ovoid. And along the edge of the ovoid were these glistening, what seemed like jewels. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And then I noticed there was like a windscreen over it. And I realized it was a Fabergé egg. And this is one of Terence's themes in his visionary states. But it was a Fabergé egg, like limousine. It was a vehicle, and there was an unseen driver behind this glass curving windshield. And so then it landed, it actually floated right next to Terence. Terence unfolded his body, he stood up, he looked in, and there was this plush red seat in the back. He stepped into it. It sort of bounced like this. And then he took out a fat one and he lit it up. And then this thing just went away. It went whir, 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 whir. And it went up through the azure veil. And that's what happened. And so at the very last moment when we were leaving, and Terence was there and Robert Venosa. There's a picture of the three of us standing there at the hotel. And I said to Terence, I'd like to share with you what happened in that room. And I said, I told the story, and the last words of Terence to me were this joyous expression saying, the getaway car. And in a way, it wasn't a sad departure. He was getting away for whatever reason, and he was getting away with his buddies. The elves were coming for him, and they were treating him really well. I mean, they were nice plush seats, and he could smoke, and he wouldn't get busted, and he was going to a good place. And it was just such a joyous, gleeful, funny thing. The irony of the whole thing, that as we met in cyberspace, that is where he was departing. And today we see that he lives there. He is committed to cyberspace. And we did a lot of work, Lorenzo and I and others, digitizing all those cassettes so that you could hear his voice, his wonderful voice. And it's happened. He lives there. He is zone ghost of cyberspace. And I have a collection of his letters. And there's one, it's in a box somewhere, but there's one from 1990, I don't know, 4 or 3 or something, where he talks about wanting to be a zone ghost of cyberspace. And we did it at his house. If you look up the video, Terence McKenna on the Natch, you'll see that whole thing. He became an avatar for the first time, and he chose the gray alien, called himself Zone Ghost. And then 8 months later, a year and a quarter later, we committed him to that life of Zone Ghost. And on his years later, a letterhead came to me, not letterhead, but a packet of letters, some of the only surviving documents of Terence McKenna of this type. and Kevin Whiteside's scanned them, which is part of the archive. And this last year, we decided to make something called spiritual flight suits, which are like, flight suits, like overalls a mechanic would wear, that had patches of all the places you'd been in terms of magic journeys. And I asked the group, what should we put on? What should be the first patch on the spiritual flight suit? And good friends Rosma and Aaron were here. And so I went and got one of these letters from the package, because on Terence's letterhead, on several of the letters, was this weird creature that was his personal logotype, his personal spirit animal. And we kind of said, like, does that look like the body of an octopus, but a cap on it that looks like a mushroom? And it's all printed off of a Mac or a PC on inkjet printers. It was pretty basic. But this was Terence's personal spirit animal. So we lifted that off the letterhead and put it into Illustrator and made this. I'll show you this. I promised there would be a show and tell. Can everybody see that? Yeah, can you see it? Robin has some letters too. So this is, we gave it a name, the Octo Shroom. And notice that the blue body, it says spiritual flight suit, but there's a little TM on one side that Aaron put in. And then you see the eyes of the octoshroom, and then the cap. And if you guys are well read, you'll recognize that is the mushroom shaman that Cat McKenna, I think, published, which shows the little mushrooms around this kind of shape. So this is an amalgam of things that. So the octopus represents for Terence the creature that can speak with visible language. It changes the pigments in its skin, and you'll hear him talking about that. And octopi basically give each other YouTube shows, their emotional state and their camouflage. And perhaps there's something to divulge from this symbol that is about Terence in our time, Terence in cyberspace. And I maybe leave that to you as a kind of another message from Terence into the ether of our time. So with that, I've I don't know if I've used up my whole time, but